haven't done one of these videos in so long, and I don't know why, because they're so fun to do. This is another episode of things I almost bought but didn't and what I'm using instead. I always say this is somewhere between an anti-haul and a dupes video, and also simultaneously neither. If you're new here, hi, my name is Becca and I'm happy you're here, and I am a beauty creator that lives somewhere between or somewhere within that tension of loving beauty and being excited by new releases, and also kind of resenting and critiquing and, living in tension with the fact that new releases are overwhelming and that beauty marketing is overwhelming, and that we as a demographic of beauty lovers and therefore beauty consumers are often overstimulated by the amount, the quantity, and the speed at which the beauty industry moves and releases new products. So this is an attempt to not only be thoughtful and intentional about my own consumption practices and my own material practices of buying and producing waste, but also an attempt to appreciate what I have and remember that I have things that I love, and to remember that oftentimes when I'm falling in love with a new thing or a new release, I'm often falling in love with the idea of what that product is in absence of the product itself. So it's a captivation with what I think a product will be, or what kind of void it will fill in my collection, or not even thinking about it at all as a real item in relation to my real collection and other real things, but just, purely object fetishism, if we're gonna get, Marxist about it. But anyway, we won't do that. I'm going to talk about new releases that I've been into, that I almost bought, that maybe I even added to cart, but I didn't check out on. First up is the new Gucci Flora 2022 collection. And they brought out a new eyeshadow palette, which has these very cool tones, these pinky, purple, teal tones. And there's also a lipstick in their Glow and Care Shine formula, which I love, but it has special packaging in the shade They Met in Argentina, which you also know I love in other formulas. I don't have the first Gucci palette that they released, nor was I very tempted by it. There was something about the packaging being so bulky, and I don't know, I felt overwhelmed by the number of eyeshadows that were in it. It just never called to me and never looped me in. And I think I have similar feelings about this palette because there are 12 shades, and 4 of them are these kind of like murky, slightly cool toned mattes. And there are some frosty blues and purples, and these tones just aren't really flattering on my skin tone. It's just not what I go for. So I feel somewhat relieved to be off the hook with that. I do love the packaging that this fall collection is in. There's this beautiful like vintage floral print that Gucci does so well. Gucci often takes vintage prints and turns them into packaging. There's flowers on the print. There's these beautiful lilies and daisies, and actually the tones of the flowers are reflected in the eyeshadow palette, which is really nice. However, what I'm super interested in and what I almost purchased the other day is the lipstick. And I love the Glow and Care Shine formula. I've talked about it so many times. I have a couple of these. I have this shade, which is a peachy pink, called My Cousin Rachel, and then I have the shade Gucci Red. I mentioned them and I lip swatched them actually recently in a favorite lipsticks video. And I love the packaging, I love the slim bullet, and I love the formula. It's a very melty, balmy, shiny, sheer, yummy formula. It's exactly what I love. And so when I heard that they were coming out with the shade They Met in Argentina, I was super excited. I have had this shade in their matte lipstick formula as well as their most recent liquid lip formula. And They Met in Argentina is such a unique shade. To me, it's almost like a coral meets rosewood, or a brighter version of a rosewood. So let me swatch it for you. you can see there's actually quite a bit of saturation and depth and like body to this. It has this rosewood quality, but then there's that touch of brightness and like almost like a coral undertone that beams through a rosewood feel. And then let me swatch the Glow & Care Shine lipstick for you next to it so you can see what this looks like. And again, this is my Cousin Rachel, which is a peachy pink. So there's the Glow & Care lipstick, and there is the liquid lipstick, and they met in Argentina. This is also a great formula, by the way. It's not drying, it's very thin, but long lasting, and it creates a beautiful like velvety lip look. So I think there are many layers to why I wanted the new lipstick. I love the shade, and I know I love the shade. And also I love the packaging, and I know I love the formula. So in a lot of ways it feels like a safe buy to me. And I do think, you know, the Gucci lipsticks, especially like their classic lipsticks, feel like a little treasure to own. They're such a pleasure to use. And if you care about aesthetics or packaging or any of that, the brand experience, they do deliver that kind of taste of luxury that, you know, I love. However, I feel a little bit confused by the shade because the shade they met in Argentina, this one, is so saturated and so interesting. And even though there are many brands that do rosewoods and bright pinks and neutral pinks, I actually find this particular shade to be quite unique. And it's been consistent for me in their matte formula, which I think I decluttered because it expired, as well as in their liquid lip. But the picture that they shared of the lipstick does not look anything like this shade. If anything, it looks more like this shade, which is my Cousin Rachel. And so I'm a little bit confused because obviously I don't expect the shine version of a shade to be as saturated or as deep even as the matte version. But I feel like they're completely different shades. And, you know, I might be wrong. It might look different in person, but I actually feel like if the product is what it looks like in pictures, it's going to be very, very close to this shade that I already have, my Cousin Rachel, and I will only be buying essentially the packaging for a dupe of a lipstick that I already have, in essence. So I feel kind of disappointed by the shade interpretation in this formula of They Met in Argentina. I am curious to see it in person because if it were a sheer, juicy, and like saturated interpretation of this shade, I probably would buy it. But to me, this is a pass for now because, you know, the thing that actually makes this shade so special doesn't seem to be captured in that lipstick at the moment, at least as I see it. Then Rose Inc. released some new shades of their cream blush, and their cream blush is a formula that I have and I know and I love. I only have one shade. It's the shade Azalea, which is this beautiful like pink raspberry sort of shade. It creates the most beautiful winter flush. And this formula is sort of on the thicker side. It has a bit of body. I would compare it most closely to the Tower 28 cream blushes, but those don't set down, whereas these actually do, and they are very long lasting. The Tower 28 ones are as well, but they stay dewy. This one sort of sets down a little bit more, and it's a very sturdy cream blush that has a lot of just lasting power on the skin. So Rose Inc. released 3 new shades of this formula. There's Camellia, which is a mauve, Delphine, which is a muted peach, and Daylily, which is a rich taupe. And obviously, I'm attracted to the warm tones, so that's Delphine, the peach, and Daylily, which is the rich taupe. I love a peachy, terracotta, like burnt earth tone sort of cheek, so naturally, I would gravitate toward this shade, and I actually almost checked out on the shade Delphine the other day. And I want to say this is actually a product I'm still considering. I haven't purchased it yet, but because I do like this formula so much, I feel like I would use it a lot more if I had more of an everyday kind of shade for me, which is either Delphine or Daylily. Probably Delphine because it's a little bit lighter in tone. I think Daylily would show up as deeper on my skin tone, but both of those shades are the kinds of shades that would really easily integrate into the kinds of tones that I like to wear. However, I did stop myself because I realized I have almost these exact shades in my collection with my Phytosurgence Skin Spark blushes. This is a blush from their latest Toasted Blushes collection. It's the shade Evaporate. It's kind of like this taupey brown, but there's a little bit of peach. Hard to say if it's neutral. There's almost like a desaturated terracotta quality to it. So let me swatch it for you. If you've never tried the Phytosurgence Skin Spark blushes, it's my favorite thing from their line. They are super pigmented. They're this cream blush in a jar. I like to just take a brush in here and just stipple it onto my cheek, and they're super pigmented, very long lasting, and not that different from the Rose Inc formula, but like half the price. And Phytosurgence is an indie brand run out of Canada. So this is the shade, what did I just say? This is the shade Evaporate. And I feel like that's actually very close to what I imagine Daylily will look like. I think Daylily, just based on the cheek swatches, might have a bit more brightness or a bit more pink to it. But I actually think this shade is a lot more interesting in that there's this like unnameable putty-like complexity to this shade that I find to be really compelling and different. It's just different and it's very complex. And I have said the Phytosurgence Toasted Blush collection is like their foray into more complex blush shades. They have their like permanent line or their original line, which kind of covered all of your blush bases. And now they're getting a little bit experimental, and I really like that. Then I have my original favorite shade from the Phytosurgence Skin Spark blushes, which is Smolder. And actually, Evaporate is the toasted version, I think, of Smolder, which is an original shade in their like original blush line. And I think this is probably awfully close to the shade Delphine, which is called a Muted Peach. So let me swatch this one for you. So that is Smolder, that is Evaporate. You can see, I mean, I picked up a lot of product with Smolder. It's definitely a lot warmer, it's peachier, it almost has like an orangey quality to it, and it's definitely warm toned. I love it because I love an orangey blush, and I feel like this is a saturated version of Rose Inc.'s Delphine. I feel like if I picked up less of this product and sheared it out on my cheeks, it would look very, very similar to what I imagine Delphine would look like. Or even if I like mixed these two, like if I mix these two, I'll just mix them right here on my hand. They would create this sort of perfect in-between best of both worlds sort of shade, and like I want that on my cheeks right now. Who wouldn't? I feel like these blushes really achieve that, and not only that, they also achieve a very similar finish in terms of formula as well. So a couple of weeks ago, I was in Sephora running a different errand for a campaign I was working on, and I came across the Rare Beauty lip liners and lipsticks, and I swatched them and I was so impressed. This was not a release that I was planning on purchasing or was really on my radar very much because I don't really wear a lot of opaque lipsticks lately. But the display was so beautiful, and the products themselves, like the tones of the lipsticks and lip liners, were so complex and nuanced and varied that I was just magnetized to this display. So I actually did end up picking up a Rare Beauty lip liner, which I've tested recently and I'm wearing right now in the shade Creative. It's a perfect shade for me for slightly overlining the lips. I almost picked up the lipsticks because they were so creamy. They're described as a matte lipstick, but I actually found them to be super buttery, and they weren't chalky at all. They weren't, they had this like glide about them that when I swatched them, it was like full pigment, one swatch, buttery, creamy goodness. I also love that they were so thoughtful in this release about the variation of undertones. I think there really is like a nude shade for everybody, every undertone, every skin depth. in this range, and I was really impressed by that. I didn't pick up a lipstick, however, because I just have a drawer full of lipsticks and I don't need another high pigment cream lipstick, beautiful as they may be. So let me show you some similar formulas that I think are comparable to what the Rare Beauty lipsticks felt like, at least in terms of swatches and how they went onto the skin. If you are interested in those lipsticks and there's a shade that you want to pick up, I do think it's a great buy because they're $20, such a good price point at Sephora, and the tones are stunning, the formula is beautiful, and actually it reminded me of the Byredo lipstick formula. And I mean, I know this is much more, this is like double the price of the Rare Beauty lipsticks, maybe even more, but it had a similar finish and quality going on the skin in that both of the lipstick formulas are creamy like instantly. They don't take any warming up. You don't need to like drag them on the skin to get them to like, I don't know, melt onto the skin. They glide on instantly and they're both instantly full pigment. So this is the shade that I have in the Byredo lipstick formula. This is called Earth Dust. You've also seen me talk about this many times. I'll even do it again just to show you like full pigment with one swatch, right? There was kind of an elegance to the Rare Beauty formula that I feel like you often see in higher end or luxury beauty brands, but you don't always see at that price point. So I was really impressed by that. The other lipstick formula that I thought of, which is kind of a random comparison, but similar in price point, is by this beauty brand called Espresso. They're an indie beauty company. They are out of Italy, and they have these lipsticks called the Aroma lipsticks, and they're a cream finish, and they're also elegant and go onto the skin beautifully, and it's full pigment, full cream pigment with one swipe. So this is the shade Capriccio. Do you see that? Like that is so creamy, so pigmented right away. I also have the shade Toasted, which I'll swatch here. Like, come on, those are beautiful. This formula also, well, the line is called Espresso. These lipsticks smell like coffee and it smells so good. It's making my mouth water. Like I want to go get an iced latte right now. But again, these are just like super elegant, high-end feeling lipstick formulas. I want to say these are even under the $20 mark. The packaging is plastic, it's not weighty. That's where you get the trade-off in terms of price point. But I do think the Rare Beauty ones, like the packaging is nice, but the formula was like mind-blowing. But obviously, I don't need more lipsticks. Then we have to talk about the Dior fall collection. Dior's fall collection is always stunning and it always tempts me, even though it's very often just a reiteration of these rusty, burnt, orangey, maroon tones, and they repackage it or they reformulate it and they serve it to you in this new and beautiful, enticing way. And every year I'm swept off my feet and I'm like, yeah, I need that. And I think what it is it just plays on my love for those tones, those rusty, orangey, like sage green sort of tones. So the first palette is the one that's really screaming my name. It has this beautiful sage green tone that's just calling to me, as well as like a shimmery champagne. It looks like there's this like peachy, bronzy tone, an orange, and then like a burnt chestnut brown. If you know me, you know I love to wear warm tones, and if I do wear a pop of color, oftentimes it is that kind of earthy olive green, which I love. So the reason why I can't buy this is because it is so similar to the Dior Jungle Quint that I already have, and I put on my eyes today to remind myself that I love this quint and I have a version of this. So this is the Dior Jungle Quint. Much like the new fall collection, there's like a shimmery, warm, peachy, coppery tone. There's a champagne, satiny metallic. There's a deep brown, and there's an olive shade. The one shade that this palette doesn't have is kind of an obvious like orange, like burnt orangey kind of shade. But it's so similar in the palette composition, in the color story, and I'm sure the formulas are very similar as well. And it's a formula that I love. I think it's super elegant, very refined, it's very forgiving, easy to blend, but I just can't bring myself to purchase a palette that is so similar to the one that I already have, even though this is one I use and I love all the time. So to remind myself, I actually put this green olive color all over my lid today, and I blended out the edges with this warm coppery shade, just to give a bit of definition. And that was it, a super simple eye look. But overall, like, the color story and the kind of DNA of those two quints are just so similar. Like, you know they're gonna look really similar on the eyes. And I've had this palette for like 3 years. The quality has not changed. It's just as buttery and smooth and blendable as it was the day that I bought this palette. I am also tempted by the other palette that has this like kind of pinky mauve tone in the bottom left corner. I think that's really beautiful, but it has this like murkiness to it. And then it's supported by this beautiful copper, this gorgeous, like almost like a strawberry cherry red, and of course the neutral like champagne and the deep brown. Dior always does a good job of creating and curating like very complete color stories in these quints. And I think that's also what draws me to this, is knowing that I can get a daytime look, very like poppy punch of color, as well as an evening look, all in this quint. I do, however, have another quint called Mitza, and this is my like warm toned orangey answer to the other palette in the Fall 22 collection. It's obviously missing the pinky tones, and it is missing that like murky mauve tone. But in almost every other way, this palette is like pretty much a direct answer to the other palette. Like if you took away this tone and turned it into that murky mauve, it would have the same, almost the same composition tone-wise as the other palette. This palette has like an orangey, a more orange undertone copper than this one does. So I feel like if I just put this copper in this palette, it would actually be super similar to the Dior Fall collection. This is all a very long-winded way of saying that I have similar Dior eyeshadow palettes, so I won't be buying the Fall 22 quints. But if you do buy them, I don't think you'll be disappointed. Or if you buy any of the Dior quints, I don't think you'll be disappointed, because they are just such a beautiful and honestly underrated formula. And then Garland came out with Eyeshadow Quads. So these are called the Ombre G Quad eyeshadow palette, and they're a pressed powder formula. They seem to have like a satin, a matte, like a shimmery shade in each palette. And there are 3 color stories that I know of. So there's Majestic Rose, which is kind of pink and plum with this additional camel shade. And then there's Imperial Moon, which actually looks really beautiful now that I'm like, ooh, maybe I should pay attention to cool tones. It has this like silver, this shimmery taupe, this deep, like almost indigo black, and then the nude shade. And then there is this one called Royal Jungle, which is all warm tones. It's gold and copper and bronze and like a deep plum shade. To be honest, I'm not that familiar with Garland Makeup. I haven't really tried a lot from the line. I think it historically speaks to a little bit more of a mature demographic, but I do think in recent years, they've had some interesting releases that seem to be speaking to a more, I mean, still mature, but slightly younger and like hip makeup demographic. So I think these quads are definitely them saying like, okay, we've arrived, we're in the eyeshadow game, like check us out. And I do think the first color story that I mentioned, Majestic Rose, is very interesting. I kind of like that in both Majestic Rose and Imperial Moon, it's a mostly cool toned palette. Like the pinks and the plum are cool toned in Majestic Rose, and Imperial Moon, you have the metallics and the black shade, but they're both offset by a warmer toned shade, which I think is really smart because it makes the palette a lot more versatile. And I think it allows someone like me who feels like cool tones can often be ashy to warm up any of these tones on the skin. However, I am not going to pick this up because I don't feel like there's a color story here, at least not yet, that feels like me. There's not a color story here that I look at and I'm like, ooh, that's the one for me. And you know that feeling when you're looking at like a lineup of different shade options or color stories and you can immediately see like, that's the one that I would wear. I'm not having that feeling with these, even though the makeup lover in me is curious about this formula and how it will perform. I actually think that the Tom Ford Honeymoon Quad, even though it's a more warm-toned quad than the Majestic Rose Quad, it does a similar thing where the pink or the berry and the plum tones are actually quite cool tones, but it's offset by the warmth of the bronzy shade and obviously this golden champagne. Majestic Rose from Guerlain definitely leans cooler, but there's a similar way where there's a mixing of pink and plum with like a warmer bronzy shade to balance out the cool and warm tones. And you guys know how I feel about this color story and this formula. It's just one of my favorites year after year. Not my best swatch work, but you get an idea in terms of like the color story and also how beautiful this formula is. The last thing I will mention is the e.l.f. Halo Glow, which is their answer to Charlotte Tilbury's Hollywood Flawless Filter. I feel like every content creator bought this the day it launched so that they could do a dupes comparison, and I was right there with them. I had it all in my cart and I didn't check out. I was also thinking about checking out their Luminous Putty blushes, as well as their putty formula in general. And I didn't check out because I feel like it just felt a little bit inauthentic to me. You know, where I am in my life now, I would rather have fewer things and nicer things that I love and cherish than a lot of cheap things and a lot of cheap drugstore makeup in my life. And I'm not saying that those products aren't good or that they don't perform, but you know, when I first got into beauty, I was trying out everything, and I tried out like 5 drugstore eyeshadows at one time and 5 drugstore lipsticks at one time. And I think it's really easy to trick yourself into thinking that you can afford more drugstore beauty or more beauty products, and then you actually end up spending the same amount as you would on, let's say, like a luxury lipstick, but then you end up with like 5 not great versions of the same thing. And I'm not saying that all drugstore beauty is not good. Obviously, there are incredible dupes for products these days, but I just am at a point in my life and in my beauty collection where I don't want a lot of clutter. And I don't want a lot of clutter that is just there to take up space. So it just didn't feel authentic to my review style to be like, well, I need to go try these things because people are going to be interested in them, even though myself as a consumer would not go out and purchase those things. And I'm raising this all to say, I think I very much live in that tension of being someone who loves luxury makeup and luxury beauty, and who does feel that the packaging and the brand experience and like the experience like of a beautiful thing matters. And also being someone who's aware that that's not accessible to everyone and that it's not a realistic place to be. And it's not a realistic standard to portray that everyone can or should have a huge collection of luxury makeup. That's just not realistic, and that's not what I believe. So I don't really have a conclusion with this train of thought, but I do want to share it with you just to say, like, this is part of my process around content creation and around balancing what I think people want to see, the things that I'm genuinely interested in creating access points for my content as a luxury beauty lover. So that's all kind of an inconclusive thought. I'm just thinking out loud here, but I just wanted to share that with you guys because it is honestly a thing I almost bought but didn't. And I am still thinking about it. If you really want a review on that product from me, I'm happy to share that with you guys. But I also didn't just want to purchase it for the sake of getting the views on a video and not because I'm actually excited about the product, because it just didn't feel authentic to me. So yeah, that's where I stand on that product and what that product triggered in terms of like a whole internal dialogue with myself. Here are some things that are coming up that I'm thinking about buying or that I will buy or that I have purchased already that I am going to review. The first one, may be controversial, is the Pat McGrath palette. And I'm late to buying it because I wasn't going to purchase it. And then I realized that I actually do have something to say about this palette. And I think that's an example of a product that I am purchasing for review, but I think that has a little bit more depth and nuance and complexity in terms of the kind of review I can give as someone who loves Pat McGrath and has most of her palettes except for Midnight Sun. So you can look for a review on that from me coming soon. I also am putting together a full face of Charlotte Tilbury, and I purchased two of the new Eyes to Mesmerize shades that are called Exaggerize, which is that like neutral bronze shade, and Sunlit Glow, which seems to be like a duochrome pinky gold. So I picked up two of those. I didn't pick up that super warm like yellow orangey gold. And I also picked up the cream bronzer, which I know is not like new relative to the world of makeup, but it's still newish and it's new to me and I want to try it. So I am going to put together a full face of Charlotte Tilbury that's coming soon. And I do have a 15% discount code with them now that I will link in the description box below, and you can use anytime on your first order from their website. The last thing that I am planning to pick up and review is the new Summer Fridays Skin Tint SPF. I think it's called their Sheer Tint. I can't remember, but it's a tinted SPF. It comes in 10 shades from very fair to very deep. And I'm really excited about this. And I love their regular SPF that they launched a few months ago, their Shade Drops. I've mentioned it as a favorite, and it's one of the few mineral SPFs that I actually love. So I'm excited to test that out. The formula of that SPF is stunning. I've thought several times as I've used it that I would love to have this in a tinted version. So I'm for sure going to be testing that out as well. So that is everything from me. Let me know if there are any reviews you want to see from me. You can always tag me and stuff on Instagram or DM me. And I hope that this makes you excited to go into your collection as well and maybe rediscover some forgotten favorites. So I will see you in the next one. Bye.